different journeys to NFP boards. We wanted to provide different perspectives of how to get onto a not-for-profit board. We're also going to share some demystifying tips of the board pathway and things for you to think about, and also hopefully some practical tips and advice that you can embed as you embark on your journey. And we also want to leave some ample time for Q&A because we understand this is a topic that many questions can come about. To kick us off, Malini is going to share with us some detail of her different and varying board roles and experiences.
Thank you, Solai. And yes, thank you all for coming and having me here. So as Solai mentioned, I will just go through some of my board roles. So I'll cover 5 board pathways, 4 of which I'm currently on. I'm doing this to illustrate that there are several ways to a similar destination. So some have taken longer with stops along the way, and some are more direct and less convoluted. So I'll start at the top with FinCEA. So this one I'm not currently on, but it was the Financial Services Institute of Australasia. My first board, and I could summarize this by saying I got on this by immersing myself in the organisation. So firstly, I started out doing my master's through the FinCEA, which was then the Securities Institute. And through that, I attended quite a few events, FinCEA events, and really got curious about what they were talking about. And then there were invitations to get involved in committees. So one of that was the Young Finance Professionals Committee, where I could interact with people of my age in the industry. And after being involved and understanding what's involved in being a committee, I was invited to lead that committee. So I became chair of the Young Finance Professionals. And then throughout the course of several years, I joined basically every program that FinCEA offered. So the Women in FinCEA Committee, the Regional Council, the mentoring program. I was a mentee and then progressed to be a mentor for about 10 or 12 programs. And through this, I got really deeply involved and understood the organisation, what their different programs were, how they interacted, not just from the outside, but from the inside. And during that time, I also became known about across the staff and the board. So when they needed a younger board member's voice, I was top of mind. So to summarise this one, I would say that showing up, contributing, understanding the business and volunteering and being all in builds trust and credibility. And so the next one is the Australian Pituitary Foundation. So in summary for that one, I would say turning my lived experience into purpose. So a bit of background, I was diagnosed with Cushing's disease in 2013. So it took me 20 years to get diagnosed after 20 years of misdiagnosis. And so for those of you who don't know, Cushing's disease is a tumour on your pituitary gland, which leads to high levels of cortisol. So it was a tough personal health journey, culminating in 2 brain surgeries. So after those surgeries, I really wanted to give back. It was an awful journey for me, and I wanted to make it better for other people. So I Googled support organisations and found the Australian Pituitary Foundation. So at that time, they were a really grassroots organisation, but they really wanted to elevate their profile and build a more corporate board. And so they wanted someone with corporate experience. So at that point in time, I was just in the right place at the right time, sent that email at the right time. So I joined the board. And a few years later, I became chair, which I'm currently chair. So I've been on the board for about 10 years now. And during that time, I've had some great opportunities, invited to be on a global board, which is the World Alliance of Pituitary Organisations. And so I've had the opportunity to speak in Venice, London, Dublin, Singapore, and to advocate for more awareness of pituitary conditions, and also been advising on several advisory groups on diversity in clinical trials. So the example of this one shows that lived experience is very powerful, and don't wait to be asked. So if you see an opportunity, something aligns to your interest, reach out and see whether there are any opportunities. A simple email sometimes is all it takes. Then moving on to the next one is Settlement Council of Australia. So this one, I guess here, my corporate experience really helped me. So in 2016, I became head of multicultural community banking at the Commonwealth Bank. And that role meant that I was able to get deeply engaged in the sector. So the role involved interacting with a lot of multicultural community organisations at a grassroots level, attending conferences, events, but grassroots events as well. And we were really the only corporate doing that at the time. And that enabled me to build those deep relationships within the sector through that role, but also build credibility and trust. And so in 2021, I was approached by the CEO of the Settlement Council of Australia, who I had never met at that time. I guess in summary for this one, it is that sometimes board opportunities come because people are watching your impact. So even if you're not actively seeking a board role, it may present itself. So moving on to the next slide is Entertainment for Change. So this is an organisation which uses storytelling to create social impact. So using film, television, documentaries to create, and then creating an impact campaign around it for a social cause. And I'm a strong believer in storytelling is the way to create behavioural change. It's actually, there's studies showing that it's the only way to create behavioural change, and it's really powerful to get people to understand people's perspective. So I've always been a believer in that. And at university, I did the Bachelor of Accounting co-op scholarship, and so our cohort was very tight, and also the one below and the one above. So we had a strong connection at university and kept those connections going after we left. And so 10 years after I graduated, one of my peers reconnected with me, and he was building a storytelling platform for change, for social change. And we've been watching each other's work over this period of time. And he believed in my perspective. I really believed and trusted in his vision. He's always been a visionary and always had great ideas. So I joined the board. And so in this one, I would say that it taught me to stay open to unexpected opportunities and relationships that are built, like when you're at school or when you're at university, you never know where they may lead. So relationships really do matter. And then the final one that I wanted to talk about is the Parenthood. So the Parenthood is an organisation which advocates for early education, childhood and care. And so with this one, years earlier in 2017, I was part of the New South Wales Council of Social Services Women's Expert Advisory Panel. In that panel, I met various connections who I'm still in touch with today. But one of those connections was the chair, who subsequently became chair of the Parenthood for a short amount of time in 2022. So at that time, she reached out to me. She was also she'd seen my work in terms of promoting cultural diversity and my passions in promoting cultural diversity and inclusion. And she was looking for someone with a diverse perspective to come onto the board. So she'd been following my work over the years on LinkedIn and wanted diverse voices on the board. So therefore she reached out. So that's an example of that you never know who's watching, and sharing your work publicly can plant seeds for future opportunities. So also I wanted to talk about the timeline on the bottom. So that's some parallel actions that I was doing along the way, not necessarily attached to any one specific board, but I was joining advisory panels, whether I'd been invited or whether I saw something and I reached out. So the NCOS advisory panel, which I've talked about, or the Women on Boards Cultural Diversity Advisory Group. I did complete a couple of courses. So I did do the Company Directors course, which is a great course, and Solai will talk about that later. But in terms of getting solid foundation of governance, I also did the INSEAD Gender Diversity course, just because I was interested in that, and then the UTS Community Engagement course, which helped me understand how to bring that lived experience into a corporate and board setting. I also was mentored, and then I also stayed connected with my networks, whether it was Women on Boards, whether it was in the industry, finance industry, or otherwise. And relationships, just building those relationships and keeping in touch throughout, even like not for any purpose, but just to stay connected. And then I also shared my work on platforms such as LinkedIn, and that allowed me to stay visible and authentic, and people to see what I stood for with not necessarily a purpose in mind, but just to kind of share my voice. So I guess in reflecting on all of those journeys, what connected all these paths, I guess every journey was different, as you could see. And some were proactive, some more serendipitous, but they all centered for me on my passion, which is giving a voice to the voiceless or supporting underrepresented and overlooked communities. So you'll see there's a theme in all of those that I really wanted to kind of elevate the voices and advocate for people who aren't necessarily heard in society. And I must say that I wasn't always intentional in chasing board roles. I was just building trust and networks and credibility and values alignment in areas that I was passionate about. And this approach laid the groundwork for board invitations to come naturally to me. So I guess that's my journey in a nutshell. Now I will hand over to Solai, and she will give you another perspective on board journeys. So over to you.
Thank you, Malini. So as you can see, I'm a lot earlier in my journey of being on boards compared to Malini. I started in 2019 when I applied for the board observership program. I actually applied in 2018 for the 2019 cohort, but I was unsuccessful because it is quite a competitive process. So I was really pleased in 2019 when I was successful to then be on the program in 2020. And for those who don't know, the observership program is a 12-month program where, as the name suggests, you observe a not-for-profit for a period of 12 months. You're with a cohort of about, in my year, it was about 70 others in the Sydney cohort. And so we're all observing different not-for-profits, but in parallel, we're also receiving some education, and this is administered by the Australian Institute of Company Directors and also the Ethics Centre as well. So I was a board observer for Hills Montessori, which is a preschool in the northwest of Sydney. I observed during 2020, which of course was the COVID year. And so that was when many of us were working from home. Those who were parents also got to teach from home. Also, the preschool teachers at Hills Montessori were also embarking on teaching via Zoom, which they hadn't done before. So as part of my role of being an observer, I was able to observe all board meetings, all committee meetings, and I also got involved in some projects that were linked to my skill set. So I got involved in a risk and a data project. So on the risk side, I helped them to develop a risk matrix so that they could look at all their risks and then set some strategies to mitigate those risks as well. And then on the data side, they had all this data on their enrollment pipeline. And so I was able to analyze that and give them some feedback and some data trends and some interpretations of that data. I thought these were both very simple projects, but I think it's really important to know that don't underestimate the skills and your skill set and what value you can bring to a board, because obviously the Hills Montessori board did not have a risk or data person, so that's where I was able to help. I'll fast forward a little bit to last year, mid-2024, when I was appointed chair of Forever Projects. Forever Projects is a not-for-profit which helps to end the orphan crisis in Tanzania by helping women to become financially self-sustainable. So that happened mid last year, but then I'll take you all the way back to March 2020, peak of COVID, when I met Mark Domkins, who is the CEO of Forever Projects. I had the opportunity to meet Mark during StartMate office hours, which was an avenue in the startup community that they were creating to pair investors and founders together so that they could continue that network aspect. So that's when I first met Mark. Loved what he was doing. He also loved the advice so that I was able to provide. And so we continued to catch up on a semi-regular basis over the years as well. I'll just take a little step in parallel. In October 2020, I did a little piece of work for a not-for-profit called the Sydney Women's Fund, where they were creating a 4-part documentary on the financial vulnerability of women over the course of their lives. So it was from crib to cradle. We were looking at financial vulnerability. So I was one of the researchers on this documentary and also the statistician. And during this time, this really helped to further iterate that I really wanted to work in the space that was to help women to become more financially literate and also more confident and self-sustainable in their finances. And so this was a really interesting project. So there's kind of this period of nothing between 2020 and 2023 where it looks like that I didn't do anything, but I actually did. I continued to keep in touch with Mark Domkins, of the CEO of Forever Projects. And in mid-2023, that's when he was asking me whether I would like to join as an advisor for Forever Projects. And the board of Forever Projects at that time was made up of Mark, his wife. There were a couple of other family members and friends who were fundamental and foundational in starting Forever Projects about 10 years ago. But as the not-for-profit started to scale, started to grow, they wanted to bring on an independent board. And the way they thought about bringing on an independent board was to bring on advisors. And this is a really great way for you to test out the organization and also for the organization to test you out as well, of your skills, your experience, and your level of commitment. It's also a really good way to see if your values align and whether you align with the mission of that organization. So that's what Malini was sharing in all of her board journeys, and that's a pretty common theme. Also, during this 3-year stint of nothing, I was also putting out content and sharing my perspective on technology investment, startup investing, and I also started writing about board and governance matters as well. I was also regularly meeting with my network and openly telling them that I was open to board opportunities and even volunteering in organizations as well. And then I started to talk to experienced board directors during this time. And I had this goal of I wanted to talk to at least 50 experienced board directors and understand the trends and themes of what they would suggest or recommend. But there was one thing that kept coming up in all of my conversations that I couldn't ignore anymore. The question was, had I done the company directors course? And now I feel that it's increasingly becoming a prerequisite. By all means, it is not compulsory, but it does feel like it's a signal, similar to what a degree or a qualification would be. But also it is a foundational subject and course in that it teaches you all about governance and all the things that matter for a board. So once I'd finished that, I found that it was easier to meet other directors. Also, all the directors that I had previously met before who asked me if I had done the company directors course, I was able to go back to them and say, hey, I've now done this course. I've also qualified. I did the exams and the other assignments that went along with it. I found that doors were able to open a little bit more because it, like Malini was saying, it shows your intention and your commitment to this pathway. So I'll now move to the Sydney Writers' Festival, which I joined the finance committee at the beginning of 2024. And that came about when I was meeting all these company directors, that I was talking to a director, I shared my resume. I didn't have a board resume at the time. And she mentioned that she sat on a different board with a director who happened to sit on the Sydney Writers' Festival board, and that they were looking for someone for their finance committee who had a finance background as well and was interested, of course, in books. And so it's one of those things of sometimes it can be an element of good timing and luck as well. So that's how, through that network and then going through the process, that's how I was able to join the Sydney Writers' Festival board. So I thought that would give you a little bit of a different perspective of my board journey so far compared to Malini's, but we'd love to now move on to demystifying the board pathway for you all.
Thanks, Solai. So, yes, so demystifying the board path. So firstly, I'll share with you some myths versus reality. So sometimes you might hear that you need to already be a senior executive or you've had decades of governance experience to join the board. Well, for me, that wasn't true. I joined the FinCEA board without any previous governance experience. I had networks, a reputation for contribution, and an insider understanding of the organisation, and that was valued by that organisation. So that is a myth. I mean, sometimes it might be relevant, but in a lot of cases, probably not. Also, you need to wait to be invited. So also not true in my case. Sometimes, yes, you do get tapped on the shoulder and sometimes you do have to be invited. But a lot of the time, like myself, I did reach out proactively, like I did with the Australian Pituitary Foundation, and that can open doors. Another thing that you might hear is that only people with legal or financial expertise can get on boards. Also not necessarily true. Obviously, it may help, but my lived experience from my perspective, the multicultural knowledge, my patient advocacy and storytelling were all powerful assets for myself. And so there's been increasingly boards are recognising other skills and characteristics of people, which goes to the reality that board pathways are diverse. And so there's no one size fits all. There's no one formula. There's no, I think it's just what matters is that you bring what you bring and how well it aligns with the mission. So I think that mission alignment and values alignment is really, really critical. And there is no perfect moment. The best way to learn is often by doing. And then moving on to pathways. So as you have seen from both of our journeys, pathways are very diverse. So from my perspective, volunteering in committees, that's the FinCEA example, starting small, immersing yourself in the organisation is really critical to really understand the organisation and understand how you can contribute with your skills. Proactive outreach, the Australian Pituitary Foundation example, sending a message, offering to help, and sometimes offering to help in something that you know you can add value. They can see your skills and they can see your expertise, and then you may end up on the board. So as it may be a multiple step process. Also being approached through visibility. So example, Settlement Council of Australia, I wasn't looking, but through LinkedIn and through the relationships that I built, the work in the sector was noticed. And reconnecting with old relationships. So people who you went to school with, people who you went to university with, you don't know where those connections may lead. So from in my case, a 10-year uni connection came back around. And then also getting involved in professional panels, committees, advisory groups, even speaking at events, you may get tapped on the shoulder. So my previous committee work led to a future board invite. So generally look at building those networks, women on board, sector-specific organisations, or as Solai mentioned, the observership program, and explore your values alignment and ask, where do you want to make a difference? So I might hand over to Solai to add anything else.
Yeah, maybe just on the myth versus reality, with a not-for-profit board, you may need to get more operationally involved compared to a for-profit board, but it entirely depends on the resources and skills that are in the organisation. So that's just something to be mindful of, and then that may eat into the level of time commitment and also other things that are involved on that board as well. We might move on to what helps. So as Malini and I both shared, the network is cultivating and meeting new people is fundamental. I think that really helps because you just never know what stone you turn and who that connects you to next. Sorry. The other thing is warm introductions to other directors and to other chairs. So now everyone on this call, you know 2 other directors in Malini and I, and hopefully we can open some doors for you. Sometimes it's just a little bit of good luck and timing that will happen. So it's all about cultivating those networks because you never know how that timing and good luck can be in your favor. And don't underestimate your lived experience. I think the prime example that Malini gave of the pituitary foundation and her having Cushing's disease is a perfect example of bringing your lived experience to the board table. Courses and continuous learning are fundamental because, like we mentioned, there's the company director's course, but once you do that, you consistently need to learn and keep up to date on governance topics and other topics. The number of times AI is now discussed at the board table, it's one of those things where whenever there's a new trend or not a new trend, just basic regulation things as well, you need to stay on top of those matters and issues. Moving to mindset, it's important to understand that and know that it may take a little bit of time before you land your first board role. So Malini and I were showing you that sometimes it took years. So in that time or forever, it's really important to be clear on your value statement. And don't be afraid to talk about the skills and expertise that you bring to the table. Having a curiosity to learn is likely fundamental, and like I was mentioning, on governance and other issues as rules are consistently evolving. One of the things that I remember a director was sharing with me was a saying of noses in, fingers out. And that's just to keep in mind that to be really mindful about what the objective of a board member is, which is more at a strategic advisory level as opposed to operational and getting into the weeds. I do caveat that again, like I mentioned, that there are some not-for-profits where they don't have as many resources, so you may need to get a little bit more operationally involved, but it's very important to be able to zoom in and out as a board director. I think I've covered the points I wanted to, but I think Malini had some extra points that she wanted to share on what helps in mindset as well.
Yeah, so I think in terms of mindset, I think, as I mentioned before, it's really important to align with your purpose. I think it's not about chasing titles, but really making sure that you align with the purpose and the vision and the mission of the organization, because that makes for a more cohesive board. Also, I would say like throwing yourself in the deep end, like saying yes before you feel fully ready. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but sometimes confidence comes after taking the leap. And sometimes if you're given an opportunity, someone sees potential in you that you may not necessarily have the confidence or see for yourself. So just take the opportunity and learn. And clearly they see something in you and will support you. Also, playing the long game. So as you can see from our journeys, it doesn't happen overnight. So just build your voice, your values, your relationships, but understand that it might take several steps, it might take several years, and it may not happen like you expect it. Which brings me to my next point, which is stay open to the unexpected. You might not plan it, but if you're trusted and aligned, opportunities will come, but probably not in the form that you do expect it. And then I think you see every role that you put yourself forward for, whether it's an advisory panel, whether it's a speaking gig, whether it's a committee, whether it's a volunteer opportunity, as a stepping stone to get to where you need to get to. So maybe we might move on to the next section, where we really wanted to give you an opportunity to share in the chat what's a cause or issue that you deeply care about, and what is a skill that you have that you think that could make an impact on the board. Now, we're doing this because everyone has something that they may care about or deeply care about, and it could be anything, but it's really important that the boards that you get involved in align to those fundamental values that you have. And also in terms of skills, you may not realize some of the skills which you don't think are valuable are valuable. Everyone on this call, I can guarantee you, has a unique skill that they can add to a board. And so highlighting that to yourself will make you slowly build your confidence in terms of putting yourself out there. So I'll just take a couple of minutes for you guys to put some answers in the chat.
Interesting. We're starting to see things on climate, sustainability, comms and PR, strategy, some real diversity here of skills. DEI, specific communities, mental health. Yeah, this is great to read. Tech, data.
So there's some great examples there, but what you can see is that most people have different answers. So everyone has a different perspective, different passions, different skill sets. So you all can add something to a board. So I think just recognizing and just having a think about, if you want to get on the board, those two questions to kind of really drive where you focus your energy and how you sell and put yourself out there.
So we're going to move to some really practical tips. So here are my tips. One is to be clear and craft your value statements. So what will you contribute to a board? Your skills, your experience. This is essentially your personal elevator pitch. So in case you bump into a director in an elevator, what would you tell them about what you bring to the table? Also, it's important to just start. You could volunteer in an organization that you have an alignment with or that you want to contribute to. And what gets you up in the morning? What priorities are you going to move in order to continue to be committed to this organization? Because often not-for-profit boards, they're not paid. And so that's one thing that you need to be really aligned with the mission and the vision. It's also important to note that you can start with the committee, because often papers and what are discussed at a committee level often feed up eventually into the board papers and into the board discussions. It's also great training and a way to potentially have less risk as you're starting on this journey as well. We've both mentioned about continuously to invest in training and programs. So, for example, with the company directors course, there are scholarships available. The board observership program is a great one that I am a huge advocate for. And I understand that applications will open fairly soon for the 2026 cohort. And I think the applications will close by July mid this year. I just wanted to put here that understanding financial statements is imperative. Whilst there may be someone with financial expertise sitting on the board around the boardroom table, it is actually every single director's responsibility to understand the financials because of the risk and the governance and the liability that is involved. So that's just one thing that I would encourage you to have a little bit of training on and build your confidence on. I would also encourage you to share your journey and your asks with the network. This is how you get your name out there and how you make connections and potentially how you get board roles. So Malini and I have shared how multiple times this has happened where you just don't know who is watching, who is observing, and who is quietly looking at what you are doing and what you are putting out there. Know the availability of your level of a commitment, both time and skills. So, for example, it's really important to understand the time and commitment that is required in being a chair versus a member. I would say being a chair is at least 2 to 4 times more work because of the liaising that you have with the CEO and the papers and just that process and system involved. It's also just be mindful of overboarding. So that's when you sit on too many boards and then you're potentially stretched far too thin, being unable to commit, but also then you may be potentially conflicted out of certain things as well. Another thing to understand with your level of commitment is what are the processes and systems that are in place for that board. So, for example, on my Forever Projects board, we're starting to embed a lot more of the governance foundations. So there's a lot more work involved versus sitting on the finance committee of Sydney Writers Festival. They have a lot more embedded processes and systems. And so it just understanding where the resource levels of an organization are, because this will impact the level of commitment that will be involved. So those are a couple of tips that I had in mind, but Malini also has some tips. So let's hear from her too.
Yep. Thank you. So as you've seen, both of our journeys are very different, but I think our tips are very similar. So just demonstrating that there's some fundamentals that you could focus on. So firstly, start by giving, not getting. So volunteering, mentoring, joining a committee, these are often the first doors into boardrooms. So giving your time meaningfully and consistently, you'll build that trust and credibility, because boards are looking for people who they can trust and can rely on in terms of giving their all into the board. Also, it's been mentioned several times, but let your lived experience lead. So don't really underestimate the power of your personal story. So you may not think it's significant, but your perspective, especially if it's underrepresented, can be exactly what a board needs. So kind of really elevate that and kind of think what you can add from your perspective and your lived experience. Being visible and being authentic, sharing your work, your passions, your perspective on platforms like LinkedIn. You never know who's watching, but sharing staying true to your voice, your values, and sharing what you stand for and letting your values shine through is really important, because then people can see what you stand for and then can reach out if that aligns to what they're looking for. Also nurturing your networks quietly and consistently. As you know, most of my opportunities came through relationships. Some built 10 or more years earlier. So staying connected, staying supportive, and also being curious about other people's journeys to see whether you can see whether there's an alignment. As Solai mentioned, staying curious and keeping on learning. Courses like the AICD, the INSEAD course that I did, advisory panels, industry involvement helps you grow confidence in those areas of governance and capability, and also shows other people that you're serious about a board journey, and also you're putting the work in yourself. Also, don't wait to be ready to start. So as you know, I didn't have governance experience when I first joined the board, but I did have the passion and commitment and the willingness to learn. And I think more often than not, some learning on the job is the most valuable. And so if someone has given you the opportunity, as I said before, take it. And also people are looking for someone who is willing to kind of throw themselves in the deep end and just learn the new skills and concepts. And also I'm just coming back to the fundamental thing of alignment of purpose. So what do you deeply care about? Because when your passion aligns to the board's mission, your contribution is far more meaningful and sustainable. So that's it from me.